Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, Season 37, Episode 5. I sing of Welsh arms and the man, the battles of Taliesin. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. And please excuse my awful Welsh pronunciations, which I imagine will be many in this episode. The works of the 6th century AD Brittonic poet and bard Taliesin survive in a 14th century Welsh manuscript of the Book of Taliesin. Taliesin is one of the most important figures in Welsh literature, one of the 5 British poets of renown listed in the 9th century Historia Brittonum. Taliesin himself may have served at the courts of several kings, and although the book ascribed to him contains poems from others and from later ages, at least some of the poems are likely to be original. Others see the earliest poems as being from the 9th century, and so none are original. Several of the poems, however, describe reigns and battles which took place in 6th century Britain and shed light on what is usually regarded as a particularly dark age. 11 or 12 of the 61 poems in the Book of Taliesin probably make up the work of an original and historical Taliesin, originally identified by the scholar I. Williams. In the most recent translation, Lewis and Williams 2019, these earliest poems are presented first. The authors include 12 poems in this section entitled Heroic Poems, and followed by Legendary Poems, being those where the author pretended to be Taliesin. The later poems, some as late as the 13th century, used the identity of Taliesin as a persona or a mouthpiece, even a mask, so they could comment on contemporary politics without consequence. Most of the earliest poems concern themselves with praising several 6th century Welsh kings. Brockwell Ysgithrog, king of Powys, reign circa 540 to 560. Cynan Garwen, king of Powys, circa 545 to 613. Urien, king of Reged, circa 550 to circa 593. Owain mab Urien, son of Urien, king of Reged, circa 595, and Gwalog ap Llhenog, king of Elfed or Elmet, circa 520 to 586. These associations may suggest the changeable career of Taliesin, passed from court to court, perhaps as a result of war, but always, it seems, appreciated and valued for his abilities as a bard and to offer praise to whichever monarch he was at the court of. The themes of these poems are predominantly military, and most are in praise of Urien, either giving an account of battles and campaigns or praising the subject for their qualities, many of which are military in nature. As such, the poems are a valuable resource for the warfare and attitudes towards war of the period, that period being after the Romans had left Britain in the 5th century and after the first round of Anglo and Saxon invasions late in the same century. Those invasions did not reach Wales, however. Nonetheless, the poems and other histories, although they date from significantly later, tell of warfare between the kingdoms of Reged, Powys, and Elmet, and with other Brittonic kingdoms, and against the Angles of the kingdoms of Bernicia, for instance. The kingdoms of heroic age Britain, from the 5th to 7th centuries, but in some cases lasting much longer, into the 11th century, divided the island of Britain into several kingdoms, which are shadowy in terms of the historical record. The names of several kingdoms and places are mentioned in the sources, but we are unsure where they were or where the borders were. For instance, the boundaries of the kingdom of Reged are unclear, and it is also unclear if Elmet was even a kingdom at all. In the 8th century, the Northumbrian monk Bede refers to it as a forest. Silva Elmet, Historia Ecclesiastica Gentis Anglorum 2.14. But it did have monarchs of its own. Reged seems to have been centred on Cumbria, perhaps on Westmoreland. Only later is it associated with Carlisle, but it may have reached south into what is now Lancashire, even as far south as Greater Manchester. Northwards it may have included Dumfries and Galloway, and to the west at some point it included Catrieth, possibly Ketterick in North Yorkshire, although some favour a location for Catrieth in southern Scotland. The kingdom of Elmet may have occupied the area around the east side of the Pennines in what was the West Riding of Yorkshire. These made up 2 of the kingdoms of the Old North. Hen Ogledd centred on northern England and the southern Scottish lowlands. Other kingdoms of which we are more sure, such as the kingdoms of Powys, the northern 2/3 of the modern county of Powys, and part of the modern West Midlands, with its capital at Chester, the Roman legionary fortress of Deva, Wroxeter, Welshpool, or another site, perhaps Myford, is best candidate. The kingdom of Gwynedd comprised north-western Wales, including Anglesey, and as far south as Snowdonia. Its capital has also been suggested as Chester, but other suggestions are all on the northern coast or on Anglesey itself. The other kingdoms were Strathclyde, Brynach, Deria, and Gododin. The other independent Welsh successor states which emerged in post-Roman and early medieval Britain, the kingdoms of Dyfed, Ceredigion, Morgannwg, and the Ystrad Tywys, do not make an appearance in the historical Taliesin poems. Only one of Taliesin's poems praises Sinan, king of Powys, where he was considered a hero. He seems to have put many of his neighbours offside, however, because of his constant raids against Gwent, Anglesey, Dyfed, and even as far as Cornwall. They all refused to come to the aid of Sinan's son, Seliph, in 615, when he fought against Ethelfrith of Northumbria at the Battle of Chester. Taliesin's praise is made in military terms. Sinan bestowed on me shelter in battle, my laps full of armlets and many brooches, a sword sheathed in jewels, the best gold hilt ever. This idea of gift-giving from a lord to his warriors and followers is usually associated with later Anglo-Saxon leaders, but having it so early might suggest that it was a continuation of late Roman practice, something also suggested by Vortigern hiring Hengest and Horsa in the mid-5th century for assistance, and in other foederati and laity mercenary and quasi-mercenary relationships with late Roman commanders. Later in the poem we find Sinan's my patron, soldier supreme. In the light of wide flames he makes war blaze. Although Taliesin claims Sinan is hated by no one, the poet then recounts the numerous wars or raids of Sinan, attacking the Wye with numberless spears. Gwent men are killed by his blood-drenched blades. War waged in fair Mon Anglesey. There is even enough detail in the poem to perceive some strategy. Taliesin telling us that in attacking Anglesey, once the Menai Strait was crossed, the rest was easy. Such a strategy recalls the attacks of both Suetonius Paulinus and Gnaeus Julius Agricola in the 1st century AD. Sinan is called a second St. by the poet. This recalls Sinan's grandfather, St. Glodrid, the renowned, circa 470 to 540, and this echoes the idea of equaling or surpassing an ancestor, in this case in their martial reputation. St. may be the same man as the Aurelius Caninus abused by the Welsh monk Gildas in his De Exedo Britanniae 30 for fomenting civil war in post-Roman Britain. Gildas abuses him for having a hatred of thy country's peace as if it were a deadly serpent, and possessing an iniquitous thirst for civil wars and repeated spoils. Taliesin's poem talks of attacks by Sinan as far as Crwg Dyfed in the south, of a craving for Cornwall and taking war to Brecon, heights, molehills to him. The poet warns, pitiful tyrants tremble at Sinan. Much of the military imagery is familiar from both earlier Roman warfare and from later ages in terms of both gifts awarded, strategies, and the qualities of a warrior. Brochwel, the son of St. was king of Powys before Sinan, probably dying in around 560. His epithet Iscathrog is unusual and has been taken to mean of the canine teeth, the fanged, or of the tusk. This was perhaps a personal trait of having large canine teeth, or it may reflect his aggressive and warlike reign. However, if his father St. can be identified as Aurelius Caninus in Gildas's De Exedo Britanniae, then the feature may have been a family trait, or an aggressive attitude shared by more than one generation. Gildas, however, does not name a domain for Aurelius Caninus, and some do not identify him with St. but as a ruler in the south of Britain and as a descendant of Ambrosius Aurelianus. By far and away the greatest number of poems considered contemporary to a historical Taliesin deal with Urien ap Seinfach Oa, or Urien Reged. He is the subject of 8 poems, and all end with the refrain, "When I'm old, out of breath, commanded by death, I will feel delight, praising Urien aright." Again, the themes of these poems are mostly martial. The poem The Men of Cartraeth praises the eponymous men surrounding their commander, Urien, who is a far-famed chieftain who holds kings in check and cuts them down, his passions for war, true lord of the faithful, misfortune for the men of Pridin's armies. Pridin, or Pictland, was the term for the Pict kingdoms north of the Antonine Wall, and the image of a true lord of the faithful waging war on them contrasts their pagan beliefs with Urien's Christianity. The poem also mentions the site of a fort, Gwen Ystrad. This is usually identified with Wensleydale, North Yorkshire, or Wintersdale in the Lake District. The poem mentions the River Eden, the Eidon in the poem, in Cumbria, which makes Wintersdale more likely. It was a fort fit for warriors' struggle. There's no shelter found in forest or field when they come to battle. Defender of your folk, like waves, roaring savagely over the land, I saw valiant men assembled in armies. After a morning's fighting, mangled flesh. I saw crowds slaughtered from over the border. A cry of triumph, a fierce shout is heard in the struggle for Gwen Ystrad. A man might see trouble closing in, champions tired out with killing. Going down to the ford, I saw blood-stained men laying their swords at the grey-haired king's feet. They sue for peace, finding no way out. There is much to digest in this passage, but the imagery of the war reflects that found in much later Old English poetry, terse but dramatic phrases which encapsulate combat and attitudes to war, and indeed they recall much earlier poetry too. Many of the phrases seem truly Homeric. The age-old epithet of defender of your folk is telling, and again recalls Christian ideology too. Other praise of Urien comes at the close of the poem. And he, keen for battle, swift in mustering for war, protector in conflict, never thinking of flight, the lord of Reged, I marvel at his daring. The context for this poem seems to have been a Pict raid or invasion from Prydain, and the fight took place at Gwen Ystrad. Close to a river, perhaps a fight over a river crossing of the Eden, where Urien was victorious. Taliesin describes the defeated enemy. I saw those who had ruined the land cast down, blood spattered over their garments. The description of grey-haired Urien implies that this was a battle late in his reign, closer to 590 than 550, and earlier battles are referred to. I saw great heroes gathered round Urien when he slaughtered his enemies at Llyuyr. Scattering foes to the birds of prey, he rejoiced. Men, brace your shields, ready for battle. No shortage of fights for Urien's followers. The location of Llyuyr is uncertain, although it may have been a border marker, possibly meaning Gwen's stone, but a site not identified. Other poems, however, refer to Urien as Whitehead, so are probably even later chronologically, in which case the Battle of Gwen Ystrad may have been fought circa 575. Other battles are mentioned too, such as the Battle of Manor, a location on the south side of the Firth of Forth. We can also note the use of both champion, heroic individual exploits, as well as the clear use of shield walls in this warfare, again features which recall later Anglo-Saxon warfare, but also earlier late Roman warfare, as well as heroic individuals. The poem Urien of Erequith may refer to a conquest in northeastern Yorkshire, possibly Richmond, although the site is uncertain. The poem continues the praise of Urien's martial qualities, recalling a fight against the Angles of Bernicia, but it also calls him a most generous Christian. Other poems dwell on his generosity to his men and his court. He is called Leader Supreme, strongest of fighters, Reged's defender, fame's lord, your land's anchor, and bravest of chiefs. He was known to the English, meaning the men of the early Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, especially the Angles, as having death at his hands and many afflictions, their houses burning, their chattels stolen, with frequent losses and bitter distress. The personal battle prowess of Urien is also praised. Your spear play is savage when war is waged. when in battle you rage, there follows carnage. Taliesin sums Urien up as the most valiant king that was or will be. There's no competition. Watch him in battle, it's nothing but terror. We will continue with this fascinating look at Taliesin and his poetry in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks once again, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.